This is a conversation with Charles Brian Quinn, also known as CBQ, who is the CEO and co-founder of Greenzie. Greenzie makes an autonomous driving system for commercial lawnmowers. In this interview, we talk about Greenzie's autonomous mowing system, how they've worked with manufacturers to upfit their system into commercial mowers, how Greenzie does dogfooding, and about CBQ's experience with bootstrapping and raising venture capital in startups. This is the Sense Think Act podcast. I'm Audrow Nash. Thank you to our founding sponsor, Open Robotics. And now, here is my conversation with CBQ. Hi, CBQ. Would you introduce yourself?
Hey, Audrow. Good to be here on the podcast. I am CBQ. I go by my initials, Charles Brian Quinn, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Greenzie. Greenzie, our big mission is to free humans from repetitive outdoor labor, and we're starting in the green industry. We have a product that helps create self-driving commercial zero-turn lawnmowers. So we help big landscaping crews that maintain the largest crop in the United States by square footage to help them reduce their cost of labor. The cost of
And
labor.
you mean grass by the largest crop?
That is correct. If you think about it, I know you've had great people on your podcast that are doing farming, but if you look at square footage in terms, grass is a crop that we maintain across the United States in terms of watering, cutting, maintaining, cultivating. In terms of square footage, I think it's about 3x corn, which would be the next. And so those people who do that industry, the green industry we call it, is a pretty big industry. And not a lot of people want to sit, stand, or push a mower for 8 hours in the hot sun, especially here in Atlanta, Georgia, where we're based. And all over the U.S., there's a shortage of labor. And that translates, as you know, in supply and demand to higher sort of demands on that. And again, when people don't want to do it, and it's also dull, dangerous, dirty, repetitive, monotonous, things that we all know our robots are very good and capable of and don't care about, then it is probably a good place for us to help supplement and add robotic workers to these crews. And our software that's based on ROS does that.
Awesome. So you brought up a lot of things. I want to
let's
start.
dive in.
So first, you kind of unrelated to your mower. You mentioned there's a story behion CBQ and why you prefer that. Would you start there?
Yeah, I've just always gone by my initials starting from high school, and so it's even become my little moniker. On every sort of site, I'm SEEBQ, which is CBQ. I used to even have the license plate CEBQ.com and the domain since '99. So. I've been going by it for a while. So, yeah. And it's funny, professionally, too. A lot of people are like, hey, CBQ? And they're like, who? And it's like, Charles. And they're like, oh, yeah, CBQ. So it's kind of a moniker that both professionally and friendly I go by. So, Audrow, we're close enough now. You can call me CBQ.
How funny. Okay. So now tell me about the Greenzie mower or your setup.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to note that what we do is we are an automated driving sort of system, right? We're basically a software package that's enabled by a set of, we call them off-the-shelf sensors. As you know, robotics has gotten very far in the past, 20, 30, 50 years, even more so recently with the introduction of the robotic operating system. And so with the standardization, a lot of the reps and things like, data structures like point clouds and
reps
IMUs.
are ROS enhancement proposals.
Yes,
they're like
bingo.
standards for the ROS community.
Yeah,
okay.
An easy one would be like, hey, use meters as opposed to, inches, right? Like that's a very good Rep 103, I believe. So,
nice.
There's some good ones out there. And so with all that, what we've found is that the time is now to take some of these sensors, like the RealSense camera, and use that to basically do a function or task. And so Greenzie, we build software. That software is enabled by a set of sensors, and we certify those sensors. We call it being a robotic ready. That's part of our robotic ready program. So we help these mowers become robotic ready. And once they have those sensors, they can then run our software, and our software adds self-driving. So we are trying to, like I said, reduce the cost of labor. So when you think about autonomous and the behaviors and things that make something autonomous, It is sort of self-directed. It acts, again, it's sensing, thinking, perceiving, and acting on the world. And so what we do is we have a sensor stack that does that for a very particular part of the process that landscapers do and that these mowers do. Sometimes we call it cutting out the middle. And that's kind of a unique term that landscapers kind of resonates with, because when you get to a job site, there's a certain set of tasks to do to make the property look beautiful or safe. If you're mowing a hospital facility that has a helipad, or a right of way for safety, or on roadways or industrial, a lot of safety reasons why you want to keep that property maintained as well as make it look beautiful. Then there's a type of task you do, and so our software helps automate some of that. Again, by doing that, we help reduce the cost of labor for those landscapers, which is why they like our robotic workers. But a lot of people assume we have mowers, and we don't. There are some of our competitors who are wonderful, and happy to mention them here. Companies like Scythe are building a automated mower, and that we unfortunately do not. We actually build a kit, basically, and we do it at the factory. So we help manufacturers and OEMs produce self-driving equipment that comes from the factory. Both strategies I think are noble, and I think that it's tough to compete. Especially you talk about John Deere, who I know that has been on your podcast. It's tough to compete with them. They produce lawn equipment, have been doing so for hundreds of years, so they've got a lot of learning ahead of them, and distribution and all that stuff. But so what we do is, again, add sensors and a sensor suite package and our software that goes on these existing commercial mowers to add autonomy.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like a clever approach, especially for a startup, to work with a company that actually makes the mowers and then kind of retrofit that with your autonomous system.
Yeah, and the word
seems
retrofit
like a lower barrier to entry.
It is, for sure. When you talk about lower barrier, when we first started, we did try and retrofit post sort of sale, and so we'd go get these mowers and put all these things on them. And I'll never forget the first time we did it. Everything broke, and then we're like, well, let's just make it more robust, right? And so we tried. And
what do you mean everything broke? How did it break?
So, when you think about how these are used, I remember the first demo I saw, Ed Wright, who's the CEO of Wright Manufacturing, who is one of our current manufacturing partners that we're partnered with to bring out our first product. I remember seeing him demo, and he's nonchalantly talking as he's demoing, and he drives off the curb and then drives back on it and drives back on it and off of it, and the mower is just bouncing off the curb repeatedly, and he puts down the deck, and the deck hits it and bumps up, and I was like, oh my goodness, the amount of vibration and ruggedization required to keep what we had originally had. We had just put these servos with an EMAG clutch to basically actuate the left wheel and the right wheel, and it worked, but it was very fragile and
it was delicate.
Oh, absolutely. And and it's funny, it's not that our end user customers are rough on the equipment. It's just that they have a job to do and not a lot of time to do it, and so they move fast, they roll over the curb, they run it back into the truck, and are on to the next site. So. But retrofitting was very difficult. And so we immediately moved from sort of this post-retrofit to at the factory. That way we can use the design principles, design it in with the mower, and get that support.
How does that work? It's like, so do you have to go to the company and say, hey, we need it at this stage? Just tell me a bit about that, because that's interesting.
Yeah, so this is part of my consulting background. In a previous life, I helped some of the big companies like GE Lighting and some other companies do software that went with hardware. And one of the ways you do it is you go to the factory where that thing is produced as close as possible to the line. They call it the assembly line or manufacturing line. And by doing the upfitting is what we call it. You call it retrofitting, but it's upfitting. That way you think about it like when you buy a car. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it a little different than retrofitting because you're not getting it all the way in the, you're not getting it from the retailer where it's entirely set up for the user. You're getting it part of the way, and then you're adding things and changing things.
Yeah,
is that what you call it, upfitting?
That's a good way to look at it. If you think about it, if you go to the, let's assume you went to the Ford dealer to go get a truck. When you go, they have some base models, the F-150, which is the most popular selling truck, and we have a couple.
By Ford. Yep.
And if you go and you say, I want this one, they're like, great. And you say, you know what would be awesome, though, is I would love one with a V8, like turbo diesel. And they go, great, we don't have any, but we could get you that upgrade package. Like, we can do that, and we get that from the factory. Like, we'll put in that order, it'll come down the line, we'll put it on there for you, and you can get even more custom than that. But so that's the idea, is that this is a feature, we call it autonomous mowing, that we built that you could upfit or upgrade and order, and then it comes from the factory. So what we've done is worked with Wright, and I'm working with a couple others right now, that where we go and we do that upfitting as close to, as I said, the factory as possible, so that they come off the line. And then when they go through the, because people who do this, the end user customers, buy their equipment from outdoor power equipment. So much like a dealer, it's kind of like a dealership, but for outdoor power equipment. They sell all these things to do this kind of activities. They have those mowers already there, and then they activate them just like, I guess, OnStar or Sirius XM radio, if you've ever done that process. That's similar to us, except you're doing software that does autonomy.
The autonomous driving. That's exactly. Cool. Okay, is there so when you approach the company that makes the mower and you want to add these custom features, I assume they don't have like an autonomous mower package. So I assume you have to work with them to do that?
Yeah. When we started the company, we were sort of like, people were like, we already have robo-mowers, right? And so if you look at the idea of a robo-mower, those are those little Roomba-like machines that, and they've been around since the 1970s. That patent has been there, I think, since 70. And so you put a boundary wire in the yard. And so the big commercial mowers were like, hey, what is this? And how is this different? And, we had to do a little bit of convincing to tell them, no, this is self-driving, assisted, sort of like almost like lane assist. And when we start using those terms, they're like, oh, like my new truck has, that where it keeps them in the lane.
Tesla probably helped.
Yeah, Tesla definitely helped. And so we said, hey, this is self-driving, but for these big commercial mowers where it takes over on part of the operation. And they said, well, that's not possible now, is it? And we said, well, look over here. And we built prototypes, and we did the retrofitting, and we did all these things. And, and I'll get back to that, but that's actually one of the thesis of the business, is that we have been iterating since we started. And the term iterate is very important to us. It means do, learn, improve, and repeat. And the process of iteration has helped us tremendously. So I think it's interesting as an entrepreneur. I look back and say, oh, it's always been this way, but I can guarantee you that, we've been through several iterations where we probably thought certain things, and then we learned and did, and now the new reality is that is what we do. Every entrepreneur will tell you, oh, yeah, I knew everything to do with the business and how we started. Yeah, oh, yeah, everything. Yeah. They don't. Actually, what they do say is they say, well, we learned a lot. So a lot of them talk about like learning through failing, right? Failing fast, right? So we were doing a lot of that in the beginning. And so that's how we got there. To answer your question, yes, when we go to manufacture, that is, the now what we do is we pitch and we tell them about this robotic ready, which has now been proven and commercialized with a couple of partners already. So there are a few systems out there, I would say, that are competitive. Xmark is a big manufacturer who makes Toro, who owns Xmark, and so they have one that they've been working on for a while, and then they even made an acquisition in our space, which was amazing. And I'm so thankful for that. Normally when a competitor gets acquired by a big manufacturer, it's actually an incredible opportunity. Like a lot of companies are like, oh, that's scary because the big guy like has it now.
They slow down?
No, it isn't that. I mean, it's honestly that, I live in a world of abundance, and so does my investors and everybody, and there's always enough for everybody to do. And so when that happens...
It's a precedent, in a sense?
And it legitimizes you, and it also helps every other manufacturer who doesn't have that, like, will pick up the phone and say, hey, I see that you do this, right? If, there are 46 outdoor power manufacturers... and you may actually be hearing some one of the mowers on the background. So apologies.
That's okay.
We're in our test lab. But if one of those 46 like starts to think that they get ahead, then the other 45 are going to be like, hey, and there may be another one. A new one comes online. 46, 48. So.
You're saying new companies?
New manufacturers or other sort of entrants to the market. But I think competition is wonderful. It's definitely legitimizing, and it's a rising tide lifts all boats. I believe that and have believed that, my entire life.
Yeah. It also seems like it makes it easy. The space grows as
Yeah,
there
absolutely.
is larger events in it.
It's
So
education,
it's easier to get.
awareness, all that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And parts maybe become more easily procured and things like
Totally.
this.
And then you get neat
Cost
stuff
comes
like,
down.
maybe standards are created, right? That are going to
Yes.
help you too as well.
Uh-huh. So what is your autonomous driving system? What's it composed of? You mentioned a lot of sensors,
Sure.
and it probably has a big computer with it, and then it has some things to interact with the existing mower hardware. But tell me a bit about it.
Sure. So we're big fans of ROS and the robotic operating system. And we're big fans of open source. So while there are parts of our stack, a few nodes that we probably won't open source just because they're not going to be useful to the overall community.
Too specific to your use case.
Exactly.
I see.
But if you look at say robot localization, which we use, it's funny. We were out there, I guess, 2 years ago, and in the field, and we were mowing for a customer. And I'll remind me to tell you about that, becoming the customer and doing it ourselves. We still do that now. We learned a lot. We call that eating our own dog food, but I'll come back to that. But we were talking about robot localization. We were using this package, and on one field, we would be mowing, and all of a sudden we'd get to this one area, and the mower would shoot and say, hey, I've got to head 50 miles that way for my waypoint. And we were like, that is a really strange bug. And we were like, that is really weird. And we
Overflow error?
No, it has to do with UTM boundaries. Are you familiar with UTM?
I'm not.
So
I don't even know. What does UTM stand for?
Yeah, so I think it's Universal Time Mercantile, and we can look it up. I apologize, but what it has to do with is latitude and longitude are all straight lines. So, and you go on Google Maps, you maybe notice that you can get at Google Maps of it's a 33 or 90, and it's all in degrees, right? So you can do any location on the planet. You can have
but the planet is a sphere.
Bingo.
And then so you get...
So
so
what
you can't really wrap a sphere in a rectangle, and then there's some area that's adjusting for that.
Correct. So we most of the libraries.
What a problem to run into.
Yeah, most of the libraries take a area and they'll do it in bounding boxes, and so you'll be in a UTM quadrant. And so once you're in that quadrant, the space goes from sort of it stays in that sort of area, right? And then once you move outside that boundary, that UTM boundary, and there are obviously 50 or so of those, as you talk about the latitude, longitude in the U.S., I think there's 5 or 6 that you go across. Don't correct me if I'm wrong on that, but there's quite a few. And we just happened to be on that one site happened to be on a UTM boundary. So when it crossed that boundary, it reset to the other UTM, which was 50 miles away.
I see.
So anyway, we found that bug, and it was great. We worked with Tom Moore to push up a PR and and push it back to the community. And now robot localization can go across UTM boundaries. So big fans of open source. Been doing it my entire life, and would love to keep doing that as long as it exists, which I hope is forever. And
me too.
And so you asked us about our stack. Big fans of robot localization. So we use a lot of the base stuff. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So standard cost maps. We're big fans of ROS control. We have hardware interfaces, which really help us with left wheel, right wheel, differential drive. What else do we use? We use a lot of the standard data. Like I said, cost map, depth clouds.
Are you using ROS 1 or ROS 2?
We are currently, our current generation stack is on ROS 1, and I think we're on Melodic, and I think we have a Noetic running around downstairs that works just perfectly fine. And so we may upgrade our entire fleet to that. And then ROS 2 we've evaluated. Some of the packages we're using aren't quite there yet. And we've been working closely with some of you guys at Open Robotics, including Michael Carroll, who said, close, we're close. And as soon as we are, we would love to upgrade. And we can even do that in field. So, but we're enjoying the ROS 1 ecosystem. But
awesome.
So you asked what's our sensor stack and sort of package look like, but autonomous mowing is a suite of ROS nodes that do a function, and that function is autonomous mowing. So if you can imagine, our system feels like an appliance. So it is a ruggedized computer, and I think you can even go to our site. We're pretty open with everything we use. It's an x86. I actually just gave a talk at ROSCon, this last one, on how to boot to ROS in 7 seconds, where I took this machine and really minimize the kernel and used Ubuntu LTS and kind of minimized that install with the pre-seed to make it a very minimized, so it boots up very quickly
Super
with
fast,
UEFI and just goes straight into ROS using systemd, which we're big fans of. We like a lot of the Unix stuff, and so where there's a lot of custom stuff, we're sort of not big fans of it. So we
hesitant,
we use a lot of like sort of trusted stuff like systemd networking and OpenVPN and some of the sort of standard stuff that's been around for a while. It's very modular, extremely big fans of node-based, single responsibility, tiny things that do one thing very, very well, liberal in the input that they accept, very specific in the output that they do. And so a lot of design principles for software that we like about ROS, and our stack does that very, very well. It interfaces with a web app that we've built that our customers love, and that's built in Ruby on Rails, which we love and is probably the best for doing rapid web application development. And there's a bunch of stuff behind the scenes there, but we won't go into all the details. But all that does a very specific function, and that is landscapers buy our product, they take the mower out, they press map, they mow a area of the area they want it to sort of finish the job for them. They press go on a little remote, and it basically just finishes and stripes the lawn.
It fills in everything. So they do the border, and then from there you fill it in autonomously.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's see. So for all of what kind of sensors are you using for this whole, so when you map it, are you using GPS or?
Yeah.
What kind of thing are you using?
Yeah, so I'll start with control and get all the way sort of there. It starts with control, and in order to be, I have a theory about robotics that a lot of people, when they envision robots, they think of the Willow Garage sort of PR2, like has to be humanoid, but in reality, robots and robotics is a way to, I think, automate and customize what would normally be considered a human level task. And so there's a lot of ways you can do it. When you think about self-driving cars, they are in terms sort of a robotics. So the first thing you have to do is get good control. And so what we do is we need control of left wheel, right wheel, because these are differential drive, and a lot of them have caster wheels in the front. So while they have bias, they don't really matter and aren't controlled. And so we start with left wheel and right wheel control, and we've been able to do that with a drive-by-wire system. And so that starts with ROS control and having a CAN bus adapter. And so we use CAN, which is on, CAN stands for...
CAN is, oh yeah,
I think
you're already going to do it.
You know it, right? What is it? It's the automotive protocol, right?
Yeah, I know it as the automotive protocol.
I don't know what it exactly stands for, but it is a protocol. We could probably look up the acronym, but it is a protocol that a lot of cars use, and it's very small and high speed and good for...
redundancy is built in.
And so we have that CAN interface layer that allows us to do left wheel, right wheel. So once we have that, we then need to read. So we use encoders, just standard Hall effect sensor encoders. And on our electric platform, we can read that straight from the wheel itself. They have encoders built in. And the reason you'll need to know that is no velocity. And so when you'll be able to say, hey...
So you do your own mapping with this. You're not necessarily using GPS. You're using odometry largely,
Correct.
And then maybe depth sensors and things.
Okay. Yes, so you're exactly right. So we big on sensor
slowing
fusion.
Down for just a split second, to speak about a Hall effect sensor. So it's a magnetic sensor, and you can count the ticks as a wheel spins. So maybe you have one magnet, or you could have a bunch of magnets, and you can count. Do you do, what's it called, where they're 90 degrees out of phase if you have two loops?
Yes, so that
you can figure out directionality?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Because one way it's traveling 90 degrees over to get the next bump, and one way it's traveling 270 degrees, or 3/4 of a rotation, or 3/4 of a phase, I guess.
That's correct. And you can get some
so you can tell if it's
have the gear
forward or backwards.
Exactly. So they have gear teeth that they're reading, and so then if you know the tick count, and you could just do the math to say how many wheels and velocity.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
And you were saying sensor fusion, because if you're using raw odometry, like just seeing how many times your wheels spin, there's slip and all sorts of things that'll accumulate as errors. So you're dealing with that through some sort of sensor fusion?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. When we first started, if you just use odom or odometry on a very nice platform that doesn't have a lot of slip, you go out, you turn left, you turn right, you turn again, you get that square, and what'll end up happening is you'll be like this, right? And it won't be lined up.
It'll keep distorting.
And what I'm saying is, you can't, for those who can't see, it's like a unconnected square, right? because of the slip. And so what we do is we fuse that with an IMU. And so we have a high-grade IMU. We've evaluated many IMUs. We've evaluated small ones. We happen to like some of the vector nav stuff because it's just internally calibrated.
And you use that for the gyroscope of it? So the
we actually don't even
tells
use all of the sensor data from it, but yes, we do fuse a lot of the components from it. Yeah, the gyroscope, which tells it which direction you're facing. Yep.
Yeah. So I did something like this in grad school. It was like some course where you use the sensor fusion of the inertial measurement unit and the odometry, and it gets much more accurate, which is pretty amazing. So that's all you're doing?
No, we fuse that along with GPS, and we do high accuracy GPS. We have the ability to run on standard GPS, but we prefer, and for some of our customers, for the straight lines and tracking that they want to do, and a lot of the fields that we have RTK GPS, and RTK means real-time kinematic. And what that means is if you think about normal
super
GPS,
accurate.
Yes, and I think you've had people on your podcast talk about this before, but you
maybe
get
not this podcast, previous one, I think so.
Yeah, you get correctional
maybe this
data.
one, I don't know.
You get correctional data, so you can get a very accurate centimeter level. So we fuse all that. Now, I can tell you that our sensor fusion is pretty heavily biased towards the RTK GPS because the quality of it is
just
very
super
good.
accurate. Those are, so if I remember correctly, and maybe the price has come down, those are like $20,000 or something to get a good RTK GPS. Is it correct? Or
when we first started,
has it come down?
It has come down quite a bit. And when we first started,
that's exciting.
I remember we were using an RTK setup that had a base station. And you're right, it was thousands of dollars for this one and thousands for the one on the machine. And gosh, just recently I saw that, and a lot of it's been enabled by a company called uBlocks. And essentially they have a chipset called the F9 and F9P. And that has taken the cost down to insane. I think we just got another sensor for, I'll admit it, I think we just got our most recent RTK for like $129, and I'm like,
oh my god, that's crazy.
And so the real kicker though is that the data correctional service really matters, and that's where you're seeing a lot of the innovation. So there's a service out there called Point Perfect that provides what we call NTRIP, which is I forget what that stands for. I think it's a network transport protocol. And so instead of having a base station, what they do is they're basically like a cell phone network, and every 50 kilometers from from certain high density areas, they put their own base station, they calibrate it with other sort of known areas, and then they can send out that correctional data over the internet. And so you don't have to have a base station.
That's
which is
nice.
Phenomenal. And the quality of that data, it's gotten really good, low latency, super high availability, and with that correctional data, it's been really good and very good for our business.
Do you ever, I don't know with RTK GPS, but do you ever run into situations where you're mowing a field and it doesn't have good GPS coverage?
Absolutely. So we've had to design a lot around that, and what happens is in localization, at least in the way we've done it, which is the best practices, by roboticists who've done this before, you have what's called continuous, and you have your discrete, and I think I'm getting that right. But in continuous, you've got things like odom that are just going continuously, and so
that's odometry, and that's the wheels spinning. Okay,
yes,
and knowing then, how far they spin.
Right, and in your discrete, it can have jumps. Right, and so in a good localization system, what'll happen is when you have when your discrete jumps, like let's say your GPS shifts and it runs out, or there's no connectivity or whatever, and it says, I really thought you were here and you were moving along, and boom, you're over here. A good localization system will go, I don't think so. I had all this momentum in my EKF, sort of saying bias that I was saying I was going 5 meters a second this way. Yes. That now when you say me I'm over here, I'm going to ignore that and fuse it back in.
So you use probabilistic methods. Correct. Like an extended Kalman filter and EKF, as you were saying?
Exactly.
And so what that does is you have a pretty good idea. Like you have a probability distribution that says I'm most likely here. And if you get some information that says, I'm way over here, it's like, well, it's probably not very likely. It takes that information into account.
Yeah.
And then it adjusts its belief accordingly. But if you tune it in a way, it probably won't listen to that very hard or very significantly.
Bingo. And what
I see.
ends up happening, the thing that's worse actually is not GPS going out per se. It's the thing that will
Wrong.
mess you up is it changing and you shifting between a high accuracy and a low accuracy. So we've actually designed our
Oh.
system such that when it starts, if you get a high accuracy fix, like we go and we're like, great. And then if we lose it, which has happened, you go down a big hill and go down and there's no coverage down here and it's starting to go out. If the system loses it, the mower will pause, our software will pause and say, hey,
Something's up.
50 seconds ago was the last time I got a high accuracy. And so the mower pauses and it'll kind of wait, and maybe it's just like fluid, maybe it's a fluke or something. And so sometimes the mower will just kick back and start going. It'll get that fix back. But if it can't, there is a chance for the operator, at least with the mobile interface that we built, to say, you know what, go ahead and turn off the low accuracy or high accuracy, and there may be a small shift in the map. And so it's not enough to make a huge difference based on what we've learned, but it is enough that you could say, hey, just turn it off. Because what stinks is how, again, going in between them and it's constantly shifting is what will mess you up. But again, with sensor fusion, what we do, think about it, like we basically use our own coordinate system in ROS, right? You have 0, 0, right, which is where our robot starts, and then we record, right? And so we're fusing all this data to determine where we think, the next point is, on the map in coordinate space, and we're using all these other systems. So the robot doesn't think it's at, lat longe. It's using lat longe as a data point to say.
An internal coordinate system. Yeah. Yeah, you transform it into your primary reference system.
And that's all robotics is, right? Is a transform and a series of sensors all connected with a universal descriptive robot format, URDF. And we love URDF. We use those a lot as well, because it's all just transforms all the way down.
Yeah, funny. So if you, so for your robot where you're driving it and you haven't heard it in 50 seconds from the GPS, which is your really good source of information for driving it around, do you have, so if you're using a probabilistic way of reasoning about where it is, does that uncertainty just, it received one good information and then it drives using odometry and, using the odometry, and then so the uncertainty continues to grow as it goes. And at some point, do you say, this is too uncertain, I'm going to wait for a better GPS, or then you trigger this, have the operator switch the GPS from high to low or whatever it might be? Generally,
I don't know the correct answer to this, but what's interesting is I think when you think about cars and how they drive so far, that where that bias could really go, and you talk about even going through UTM boundaries and things like that, that's where a lot of that will grow. In the areas that we're doing, even like the large acreage, even it's enough to do a full day of mowing, and you're totally okay running on that same localization and being able to cover that field, and we're good enough. And we haven't run into really any of those. And what's interesting is at that moment, you reset, you turn off, you go to the next site, you turn back on. And so since it's not long running, like a truck going across the US and really accumulating so much bias, we've been okay. Knock on wood.
Yeah, so the error doesn't stack up that significantly, and so it's fine. At least not that I'm
aware of.
Awesome. Okay, so then what other sensors do you have? So you have odometry, you have some depth cameras and things like this. What else? So, or how are the depth camears used?
Yeah, our perception pipeline we're really proud of. We are. I'm a big fan of AI and ML, and I think it's going to happen. But I'm actually not. We're not using it. I think.
What do you mean it's going to happen?
I believe that some of the AI and ML modeling and some of the training and the networks that are being developed out there are going to revolutionize a lot of the tasks that we have to do algorithmically or programmatically. And I truly believe that. However, I think that right now it's a bit of a black box approach, and that the amount of data required to really train it up for what we would consider to be good enough.
It's prohibitive.
It is, and so
you need like a million examples of someone walking in front of it or something like this.
And everybody who corrects me says, "Oh, we've got synthetic data," and I'm like, "Well, synthetic data is synthetic data. Like you can only change the color of a cone 7 times, and it doesn't really add that much."
And distribution mismatches between simulated data and real data are huge a lot of times.
I mean, I know because we've been mowing in the field, and you'd be surprised at the stuff we went over. Yeah. So what we've done is we've taken a really, I guess, a pretty unique, and this goes back to our design principles approach of really keeping it simple. And so what we have is a lightning fast C++ pipeline that does, ransack, which stands for I can't remember
random sampling.
Yes, and what it does is it tries to find
consensus.
That's right. So it tries to find the ground plane. And then anything above the ground plane is an obstacle. So this is not like we're trying to classify and say. So the way I describe to our customers is they're like, does it detect like kids? And I'm like, it does not make a distinction between a garden gnome and a kid. If it sees something above the ground plane, it's going to stop.
It'll.
Right.
Yeah. So just to go back slightly for ransack and talk about a little bit about that. So you have your depth camera. Your depth camera points over the ground. And then what you're going to do is check a bunch of, it's going to give you points at different depths. And so from this, you're going to try to fit with a math equation, a plane on that. So a 2D surface. And the one that matches the majority of the points is the one you're going to select. And it's a fast algorithm.
Yeah. And
so
by the way,
anything that's on top of that or deviating from it, you're like, this is something.
Bingo.
Is what I understand.
Yeah, and not to get into all the details, but we have some special fun sauce we do around line fit and some of the other fun stuff to make it really fast and accurate. And then, again, all that's translated into just a standard cost map. And the cost map would be, hey, when it sees something that is a tree or vertical plane or anything above that is not part of that surface, then it says, hey, I can't go there. And so it creates a very large infinite cost map, to say like, cannot navigate there.
Yeah.
Right? Yep, exactly.
Okay. How do you deal with like, so I imagine like the way you want to handle a kid in a close distance to the mower and the way you want to handle a pole would be very different. How do you, like if there's poles in my lawn or in my field.
Sure. You want to just go around them, whereas with a kid, you want to stop, right?
Yep.
What's interesting is when you think about, and this is natural as humans to sort of say, like, let's solve the entire domain, right? Like, let's do it just like a human would. And what's interesting is having developed this company, from iterative and from these bases is sort of like, how do I solve the first immediate problem, which is a job to be done,
and get as far as you can.
And get as far as we can. That's
that iterating you were speaking about.
Exactly. Is that when you actually talk to customers, they're like, you know what? They're like, I'm good at going around things. Like, by the way, like I can go right around a tree. I know where the brush is or the pine straw or whatever it is or the roots. They're like, I can do that. What I need help with is just the sort of big, monotonous, exactly. And so what we've done is we've built our system such that it is made for those open areas. And so when a lot of people do that, they're like, well, I probably can't use it because I do this one that just has trees everywhere. And we're like, great. The good news is the mower still works like you normally do. Yep. Like I don't turn on cruise control the moment I get out of my driveway. I hope you don't either. I only do it when it starts to get really repetitive and boring. And I'm like, I'm on the highway. Let me turn on cruise control. And so it's the same functionality that we've developed, right?
Yeah. Cruise control is a very good metaphor for this.
Bingo. Yeah.
I see. Because you use it when you have a spot that's incredibly monotonous. Like it's just this big open thing that's going to take a bunch of passes.
Yes.
And thus a big open field that's going to take a lot of back and forth. And so that's when you use it. But for the highly custom stuff, like if you had a bunch of poles or trees to go around, in which case you don't engage cruise control. Correct. You keep the robot. And so your systems are made so that a human operator can just jump on it. Like you're not modifying the spot where the human works.
Right, and that's been very critical even when we first developed it. I remember a customer early on telling me, hey, your system may be great and may never break, but this is my livelihood. So there always needs to be a way to disconnect. And so that's one of the features we design in the Robotic Ready. If you look at our website, there's a switch from a manual to autonomous. And, it's funny, you and I both know that it's probably not needed in the future at one point. But it is a physical safety blanket type thing. When you do this, the entire system is cut off. that could have autonomous control. And so there's no way for the system to take over and sort of issue commands to the wheels. And that's a very fun thing for our customers, a relieving, safety blanket that they like. And it's also a productivity thing, like they can always sort of say. And when you say jump on too, I want to be careful to say that when the mower is in autonomous, because we have sort of 360 cameras, if you run up to it, even from the back, it'll stop. If you even somehow were able to get up and dodge it or whatever, be a ninja.
I wasn't meaning this, but
no,
yeah.
But it's fun to talk about. Like if you were to jump on the back, a lot of the mowers have a thing you stand on, a platform, operator presence. If you get on that, like we used to allow people to ride on it while it was autonomous, and now we don't because it's not a safety thing. But it was fun. You could ride on it while the mower was going.
That would be pretty cool.
But now if somebody's on there, it won't allow that, right? So, we've had our customers try and put their safety people on it, and there's videos of them like running up to it, jumping on it, and just stopping immediately. And we're like, don't do that. And they're like, well, we got to test it. I was like, okay.
How funny. So it almost, to me, it seems like a clever approach to do this where you have the ability to toggle between the two, because it seems like if you're making a fully autonomous mower and you're building the entire mower for the fully autonomous case, so you're not making a spot for the human to sit and work on it or to drive it, it makes it so you have to solve every hard problem. And I think that that's probably, like, there's a lot of them I'm sure you can speak to, like, how do you know if, I don't know, you can go over these routes or go around all the things.
Bingo.
But then having the human do these hard ones, that seems very clever to me.
A good example would be like high grass, right? So like there's a big, brush of grass, and we ran into this, right? Like, one of our customers got a little behind because they don't have enough labor, and they came out and they're like, hey, listen, like this field is like knee-high grass. Like I was supposed to hit it last 3 weeks, maybe 4. And I didn't. And so it's like way up here, and we're like, and so the mower was like, like can't go here. Like even we have a feature for avoidance, which, in a field, they can just have it go around. And so it's just constantly trying to go around everything. And he's like, it looks like it's drunk. And we can look through the cameras. And so we looked through the RGB and we're like, whoa. And so we did design a feature for relaxed obstacle detection. And so we raised the ground plane of the ransack. And so we do let him operate with a higher. But when we do that, again, this is all about jobs to be done. So we trust our operators. They're trained. They're certified to do it. And we trained them on this. And we said, hey, listen, when you press this button, it'll relax it. You better be sure that there's nothing in there. And when he did, he was like, works great. And we rolled that out, 2 weeks later. And he was like, this is wonderful. Thank you. Can you do it? Can you add this feature? And we're like, yep, sure can. So we keep going with them. And that's kind of how we run. But you're right. It's the iterative approach, right? And you hit the nail on the head, which is how do we augment human capabilities, especially where in these highly repetitive, dangerous, dull, dirty, monotonous things that robots are very good at and likened to. And then how do we keep the person able to do the creative, unique, beautiful, and things that humans will always be good at and should be good at? That to me is the future. It's what I love about why I do this and why I get up every day.
It's also, so for all those are great reasons. It's also pragmatic as a startup too, because you're not doing the hardest problem first. You're not doing every hard problem all at once.
Yeah.
You're doing just the minimum to provide value in a market, which is fantastic for, I'm thinking about autonomous cars now. And you see huge companies like, say like Cruise, who has like, I don't know exactly, but like thousands of engineers working on this problem to fully automate driving. And a lot of really great things have come out of that. But as a startup, it's hard to do because you don't have 2,000 engineers. So solving an easier problem that still provides a lot of value, kind of like what Tesla's doing in a sense.
Yeah. And again, we're sort of copying a lot of those. Cruise has been amazing. Our product manager was just in San Francisco over the holidays and was like, I saw a couple riding around. He's like, it's incredible.
Yeah, they're everywhere. It's crazy.
And
Cruise, Waymo.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And what I tend to think about the off-road capabilities, what we're doing in the autonomous space where, what's interesting for us is I've always tell people is like, hey, when we don't know what to do, we stop. Now, I think as a self-driving car, I think when you don't know what to do, like you can't just stop in the freeway, right?
Yeah,
So
gosh.
there has to be a lot more, and there's people involved. And I mean, for
Oh,
us,
totally.
we're
And
in controlled environments. Like we can, in some of the standards we're working with are sort of industrial, right? So there's a controlled environment. You don't have people running around. Hell, it's interesting because people are like, well, what about schools and kids? And it's like, hey, why don't you ask a landscaper what they do? And have you ever seen a landscaper mowing around kids? No, if the kids are out, they don't mow, period. End of story, like
yeah.
manually. So,
Hmm.
so the automation is capable of doing now. And I think that the off-road space will continue to have leaps and bounds. I
What
truly.
do you mean off-road space?
So when I think about autonomy, there's a lot of standards right now. If you look at some of the bodies that are certifying on-road autonomy through some of the
Hmm.
standards like the ISO 26266, I
Two?
think, yeah,
Oh, okay.
or what I think it is. It's one of those. I just
I don't know.
2626. I just say it until it repeats. But you have those
I think
levels, right?
Ryan Garapi from ClearPath, he
Yes,
mentions
yeah. I
2626,
listened to that one.
262,
That
or
was a good
something
one.
like this often. Okay.
And so
Yeah.
those are the autonomy levels, right? Level 1 up to level 5, where like level 5 is just, and level
Can do
5 is kind of
everything.
interesting because I've heard people say that level 5 would be like you tell your car like, hey, take me to the beach, and it takes you to work instead because it's like, hey, you actually need to go to work.
That's
Like it's
funny.
truly self-directed, right? It's like, no, you don't need to go to the
Yep.
beach. You're supposed to
That's
work.
funny.
But I digress a little bit. But we talk about on-road versus off-road. There's these standards, and in off-road we don't have that. Like there isn't a body like
Very little
IIHS,
standardization.
yeah, exactly. That's determining these. What we do have is a lot of some of the ones for industrial robotics, and so there are standards like R1508, which is a robotics for automated machinery and vehicles, and those are the ones that we're going for, those standards. And we've been really lucky. We've working with some external consultants for risk
Hmm.
analysis, as well as we've got just hired some validation engineer from Rivian. So we have a lot of firepower on that, and I think that our and we're working with some of the industry as well, some of the outdoor power industry people directly to help make sure that those are safe standards. But we're doing that in conjunction with our customer, who also
Yep.
like has a job that they want to get done. I tell my
Yeah.
team we have 6 core values, and safety first is first,
Yep.
and number 6 is customer success, and they're not in real order. They're all important, but if you think about it, like if safety is like the most critical, then the safest thing to do would be to just sit in an insulated bubble and tell our customers you can't
Mm.
mow because mowing's dangerous, right? That would be the
Yeah,
safest
it
thing.
is.
But
Hmm.
in the end, there is customer success, and they've got a job to do. And while it is dangerous, we accept those risks. And the
Hmm.
reason we accept those risks is because we've done enough risk analysis to know that, like, hey, if I do this safely and I follow the procedures and the guidelines, the risk is low enough that I'm
Hmm.
safe to do this. And so where we fit is trying to bridge that gap between I've got this job to be done and I still want to do it safely and with the least amount of risk possible. And I frankly think that when we look back in the future, we're going to look back and say, "Wow, can you believe that we had humans sitting, standing, riding on these things that were prone to rollovers and
The
cuts and
huge spinning
burns?"
blade.
Yeah, and we'll be like, "Oh," we'll be like,
Huge,
"Yeah, we
heavy.
used to drive around in cars and smash into each other all the
I know, I
time.
was
It
just
was
gonna say,
nuts."
yeah. Yeah, the cars are so dangerous, and it's funny because like they're still relatively safe, but they are one of the most dangerous things in modern society. So I think
Mm-hmm.
like 50 years from now, it'll be like the barbaric that we were driving around, like the risk. But
But
so
it's the only way to go right now. So
it's true, yeah. Unless you walk or bicycle, and bicycling is much more dangerous in
it
cities.
is. Speaking
So
of bicycling, you got to
yeah.
get you've got to get Brandon from Luxonis on your podcast. The work
Brandon.
that he's been doing with Depth AI and the Depth AI platform. These
Okay.
are cameras that basically run AI ML on them,
Hmm.
and they have great ROS drivers, and we're helping a little bit with that, open sourcing a lot, but phenomenal. And speaking of bicycling, he started this company because he had some friends who, and I won't mess with his story, but they had a some accidents, and he was like, "How do we prevent this?" And he's like, "We got to get a camera that
Oh.
faces behind." And so he tried to prototype one and was like, "How do we do this?" And with AI and ML where it is right now, he was able to do it. And so he open sourced the
Hmm.
platform so that other people are able to do it. And we're actually excited to start implementing that on our next gen, which we've already started. And so
Huh.
in terms of think about like the RealSense and the Depth cloud is a great protocol for algorithmic. But like I said, that AI stuff is coming fast. I mean, the stuff that they can even do, they can even output a depth cloud using, some
An
AI and
RGB
ML.
image.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the
And
quality.
better than stereo and these kinds of things. In some,
I've been super
like,
impressed, and they move fast. So you definitely got to get him on because he's, in terms of robotics,
okay.
they're going to revolutionize it, I think.
Awesome. I'll look into having him on the podcast. Thank you for the recommendation. Um, one thing that I'm wondering, like, how do you see standards bodies being helpful in these? Is it because they establish well-defined protocols that are well thought out and thus they reduce risk, or where is the value in establishing these standards?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask this as an entrepreneur who thinks that all rules are there for somebody else. I'm kidding. The rules are meant to be broken. I don't believe that, but I'll say this. I mean, I benefit from them every single day. Like from the headphone jack I just plugged into to the USB that I had to plug in and then turn around and then put back and then do it the third way, right?
I know.
Those are all standards, right? Web standards, ROS being a standard, the rep that we talked about. I'm a huge fan of those, and so what I think where I think the best things get built is in a company is leading and really driving that, and that it isn't all driven by consensus and committee. Now, I'm a big fan of committees. We're on a few, and but where I think that you can get in trouble is trying to design by consensus. I have a rule in our company, and my team will kill me for saying this, but there's three types of decisions that are made at Greenzie. And this is all companies, by the way. There's command, control. There's consensus, and then there's consultative, right? So let's go over the three. So in command is when I come in the room and I'm like, hey guys, or hey people, hey everybody, hey persons, hey everybody, we're doing this, and everybody goes, okay, let's do it. Consultative is command is pretty good in sort of wartime and scenarios when you need somebody to just come and say, hey, this is what we're doing.
Make decisions.
This is the protocol. Yeah. Consultative is very good, and consultative is very critical and probably the one you should be doing in business, and the most important. That's the one where someone comes in and says, hey, there's a decision that I'm in charge of making because I'm responsible, or this.
And you seek expertise?
Correct. Kind of and you said, I'm seeking your consultation on it, but ultimately I have the call. And that's how all decisions in business should be made. The only decision in business that should be done consensus is where do we go for lunch? That's it. Because I just think that watering down of sort of like we've got to get everybody to buy in and fully understand it. If you had to ask everybody, just nothing would get done. And so I do appreciate committees that are the appropriate size, that are that actually have stakeholders who are committed and not just in it to sort of express power or sort of lobbying or interests that aren't their own. Then I think you have very good standards, and I'm all for that. So again, you get real world, and that's what I like about the ones we're on. They're not from people who are just trying to stamp this out or competitive. They are people who are actually like end user, who benefit from it. And where I think this benefits is that, we've seen this in the automotive industry. There are standards bodies that say like, hey, here's what we think true sort of autonomy would look like. And these are some of the things we do. It's funny. There's a simple one that, I got a new car, and when you go to the back, there's a lift gate and there's a button, and all the iconography is all sort of standardized, right? And so, it's even funny, like it's an SUV, but the iconograph, I forget it. The icon itself is looks like a car
or something,
right? Yeah. And it's a hood closing, but I know when I see that button, I click that, and I know that the hood will close, and that's because of standards. So standards help us all, so we all don't have to read the manual every time we do something. They really help with usability, safety, and I'm a big fan. I do sense though that there are some that have probably gotten too big or don't have appropriate stakeholders that matter anymore, where I think a lot of damage can be done.
How do you determine if it's too big?
Oh,
how do you figure out the good size?
Yeah, I'm not the one to determine it. I think it's all context dependent. But I'll quote
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos because he seems to be the smartest man on the planet. And he says, "What is it? The pizza rule, right? So if you can feed a pizza, that group is fine.
Oh,
It's the fine size. But
interesting.
anything bigger than that, he's like, nah, get rid of it." So
That's
everything is
funny.
done in feeding. I think it's the pizza rule. It may be 2 pizzas. I'll have to look it up.
Some small number of pizzas.
Correct.
Anyways, interesting. Okay, going back to your autonomous system a bit more. So you have many depth cameras. They're pointed. So you use odometry, and GPS. You're doing some
And
sort of
IMU.
sensor fusion there, and
Yep,
IMU.
so sensor
Yeah.
fusion, correct. So we
Yep,
create
so
local and global, right? Yep, go ahead.
and then you have cameras, depth cameras. So you were mentioning the Intel RealSense, which is structured lighting, I believe, or maybe it sends out a laser or something.
It does in the outdoor. It probably ignores a lot of the pattern project that happens, the IR projection, because of
Just
the
uses
light.
stereo, or what does?
And it works pretty well. So it is stereo depth, right? Yeah, and known points
Stereo.
between them.
Yep, and so you can infer how far away everything is by the disparity in the images taken by
Bingo.
both of the cameras.
Bingo.
Okay, so you have those. Those are facing all. You have like one of them on each corner, or they're all around the
Yeah, we used
lawnmower
to do
vehicle.
360, but what's interesting is that there are directions that a mower cannot go, just like a car, right? You know, you can't, a car can't suddenly move laterally diagonal back.
Yeah, not
and say-
holomorphic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Not holomorphic. And so, having said that, we have pretty close to 360, but we actually have a bias towards the front being more important because that's the primary direction that it goes. And so that sensor is actually a little bit duplicated. If you look at our current one, we have a little bit of overlap, and those are calibrated, like I said, to make sure that we can see. But yeah, so we have very good coverage around the mower and then in the back. But there's, I mean, there are definitely sort of areas, sort of here where it does not move. But the good
Like
news is
back
when it,
left and back right kind of thing.
yeah.
Okay, because you're not as worried about someone approaching and the mower running them over or
No,
anything.
even the turns
because
that
it
it
can't
does.
go that way.
Exactly. And even the turns that it does, as soon as it turns, it sees you and is like, whoa, I can't finish that turn, right?
I see. And yeah, these are, you said it's like 2-wheel drive too, and you can turn in place because the front wheels are casters.
That's right.
These
We
kind
call
of
that
things?
zero turn or turn on a dime, right? And so what's interesting is when we first got the mower, I used to be able to say I was new to landscaping. Now I can't, right? Having been in it for a while. And so when we would go out and we'd be like, oh, cool, let's just turn. And we would just zero turn right there. And when you do it, landscapers will go like, ooh, you just rutted the grass. Because it's true. Like if you imagine, if you have one wheel that stays stationary and you pivot the other, you actually tear up the grass. And so our first turns were terrible.
You don't put one wheel forward, one wheel in reverse?
You do now, and that's what our algorithm does, right? So that's what we do is we call it a perfect. They call it the Y turn, or and so you can watch our machine do it, but it goes forward, and then it actually uses its own an inertial. I guess I don't know what you call it, but it's sort of kinematically so that it backs up and then goes straight, and it lines up those casters perfect, and so it executes what is a very good turn. And when landscapers see it, they're like, "Whoa! It looks like an experienced
That's awesome.
person,
Yeah.
right, doing it." And it doesn't
That's
rut the
cool.
grass. And of course, it does it every time, which is kind of fun. I mean, if you're in a hurry, you can always just get out of there.
Yep.
But what's great about a robot, right, is that a robot is you teach
Infinite
it one
time.
time to do it, and it's like I'm happy to do that exact same turn every single time.
Yeah. Okay, so do you have any other sensors on your autonomous
Let's
system?
see. So
I think I
we
saw
hit, I think we hit the,
sonar.
Yeah, so
mentioned
we've had
one of the
ultrasonics on
videos.
it. The problem
Ultrasonics.
with ultrasonics is, and that was short-lived. Some of our machines still have it, but we're not using those, and I'm happy to disclose why. That at the speeds and times we were going, it was only turning on for a very minimal amount of the thing because we're going, I would say, pretty fast, and we have been insanely happy with the point clouds, and we've actually, our newest generation has a LIDAR that has added a secondary form of redundancy. We're actually using the Ouster, and we're super happy with that. And we actually, on our current gen, we use the LiveVox LiDAR as well. And with that and the depth sensing cameras, we've got our redundancy, and it's much better than the ultrasonics. Were really it's fun. Yeah, they're very noisy, and at the speed and vibration we were doing, they just weren't adding a lot of value. There was they were not making the system safer, which was the whole point. They were adding complexity to the BOM cost, bill of material, and so we decided to cancel them. I'm impressed with some of the new stuff that's coming out. We're always evaluating sensors in our lab downstairs. We have some fun stuff that I probably can't talk about, but there is some unique stuff out there that in the ultrasonic and sort of what you would call closer to that almost audio type spectrum than visible light, right? That I think will be capable. But the neat thing about what we're doing is, again, if it's a structured data and we can use it, then we will incorporate it as part of our standard and spec. But as of right now, those ultrasonics aren't buying us a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for LIDAR, are you using, is it a planar LIDAR or is it one that's sending out a few strips or?
The LiveVox is a unique one that I think is, I am probably not the best to talk about it. We have a whole systems team that evaluates the hardware, and I saw a couple of them come in, and I definitely saw the pricing of some of them coming in. We always have fun stuff in our lab. I think so we're venture backed, and so what's interesting to me is, and I've been always done bootstrap companies, but in venture we're trading a capital for speed and growth and making our customers happy. And so what our team does now is, and it's real fun to be on the Greenzie team because they don't come to me, period anymore, but they don't come to me and say, hey, there's a $35 IMU and a $1,000 IMU. Which one should we get?
1,000.
No, they buy two of each one, and we evaluate it, and we choose the best one, right? And
that's awesome.
And we FedEx ship it like overnight if we can, right? Because time is of the essence. So they do that now, and we know that. So I think the ones I've seen are the Ouster OS0 128, which is the highest grade one. And the reason is because we're software heads too, so we're like, let's buy the 128 because if we can make it in software to a 64 or the lower res, like we can do that in software. And we can figure out if it works for us, right? So we can always you can always go down lines in data and destroy data, but you can't recreate it. So I've seen some of the and I've seen some of the initial work on that, and it's been phenomenal. Like the amount of with our depth cloud, you can tell what things are. Like you can see humans, and because it's hard to visualize, right? Like us humans, we're not good at visualizing a depth cloud, even though there are some things to do it with color and things like that. Like red is close and blue is far, whatever it may be. But with the LIDAR, like the amount of data in line scanning that we get with both of those units has been phenomenal in terms of range.
Interesting. Do you think the LIDAR will ever replace the depth cameras?
I'm a probabilistic.
Or it's nice having redundant systems.
Yeah. I'm a probabilistic guy, right? You nailed it ahead of time, and so I think that the world is full of dirty sensor data, and you should take as much of that dirty sensory data as you can, apply probability to do the task at hand, and whatever comes out needs to be the one. I don't think that there is an end all be all. It's funny. I mean, you look at like the Tesla, and I know that they're all sort of deep on vision, but we know, I have some friends in the industry who've been doing this for a while, and they're like, hey, like fog, like they're like fog, and they're like, so this is like a known thing. So I would not be surprised if the future is better than humans, and it could be.
Totally.
And using sensors and things that we don't have. We just, we happen to see in RGB, so we tend to sort of go for that. But there's no reason why the world of a robot shouldn't be like an insect that can totally see, completely different spectrum than us, right?
Yeah, infrared seems very useful for a lot of things. And
totally.
All sorts of other things. Okay, that's really cool. Let's see. So these are your sensors, and then do you have a computer on board? You mentioned it's an x86 architecture.
Yep.
What is it? Is it like a super powerful computer?
No. There are a couple other things. I'll mention that. So the computer is not very powerful, but I would say it probably is. The main thing though is heat. So they're ruggedized industrial DIN, rated for fanless, for heat and vibration. And those are critical. Wow. And by the way, we have hit the limit on those in Texas several times. They do not mess around in Texas. They do not mess around with mowing. They have practice fields on practice fields.
Wow, that's crazy to have practice fields for mowing. Do you think there'd be enough mowing?
No, it's practice fields for football, but and sports and all this, but it has to be mowed every week. I thought you were saying just
for mowing. Yeah.
Well, we have those, but
yes,
but yeah, and so we'd be out there, and it was 105 Fahrenheit, which is, I don't know what that is in Celsius. I should, because I'm not a roboticist. Close to that, like probably, yeah. And so our computers are rated for, I think, they may be up to 70 or something like that, which is nuts. 70 Celsius.
70 Celsius?
Or which is like 140. So I may be off. It may be 40 and 140, because I'm not very good at the conversions, because I have Siri that just tells me. But anyway, the point of the story is that we hit the heat.
The limit.
And our USB bus died and fell off, and so all the cameras were gone, and of course the mowing is like stopped. But what's funny is we were apologizing to our customer, and our customer was like, "I'm done too." I mean, they're like in terms of human, like we shouldn't be out here either. Like when it's 105 and humid, and the mower, gives up. And so they're like, it's you're good by our book. So, but what is cool is we did fix some of that. When
and made it more robust.
We've added heat shielding and some of the exhaust. We got one of those FLIR thermal guns to do some measurements. Yeah. And I was surprised. How hot do you think it does get on the at the exhaust point of the engine on a mower in Texas? Like, what's your guess?
I don't know. 180.
730 coming off the exhaust. So
yes, that's crazy.
You were off by a factor of 7. Yeah, yes. And so it's very hot, and so we originally had our sort of exhaust sort of blowing towards the back of the computer, and there's this area, and so ours would just heat up to where it stopped. So now we vented it differently. We've added some extra shielding with air, which is another reason why we love working with the manufacturers, because they're like, oh, we've been dealing with heat shielding forever. They're like, here's what you do, and they just added 3 things, and they're like, done, and we're like, oh, cool, check.
That was easy. Yeah.
I don't think we're done yet, but there's that. Now, we love microcontrollers. So we're a big fan of, I think we use Arduinos, we use Teensies. I think Teensies are the current generation. And the more we can do, we have another theory about probabilistic robotics, but another theory is that the more we can do at the low-level hardware, the safer the system will be. And so anything we can do that becomes sort of rote and is not in C++ or something high, like at a high level, I would call C++ a high-level language, even though you can go low. If we can move that down to the microcontroller and have a bona fide thing that when it turns on, that's the only thing it does, and it's dedicated to that. So
really single purpose. So it's the same reason you like nodes in a sense.
You're exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
Which is why I'm super excited about some of the ROS 2, stuff that you can run, on the device where it just outputs a topic at whatever rate. Yeah, that's going to be really cool.
Why? So if you're using C, do you do things where you're allocating all your memory beforehand, or
C++? Excuse me. Yeah, we're using C++.
You said you're using C++. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you avoid
the
certain
microcontrollers are C, right? And for sure, we're doing that in whatever the microcontroller language is, Arduino, ESP, whatever those are. But we're using C++ for the main stack. We still also use some Python for a lot of the
higher level stuff.
Statistics are very good. So mowing, our progress monitor, and a lot of that stuff that generates graphs and GIFs and things like that, can't be Python for that for sure. So again, they all speak ROS topics on the back end, so we're all happy to oblige, right?
When you put things on the microcontrollers, how do you test them?
Good question. A lot of that is kept, sort of very low level, but it does not have the same test suite that our ROS does. Yeah,
because you're integrating all these things. You probably need like a spoof, or maybe you can run. I don't know. I'm just curious how you do this.
We have a lab downstairs. I'd have to go grab our systems engineer, who is probably down there doing it now. But a lot of input, a lot of output. I mean, a lot of graphing.
Manual testing to prove that it will work as you expect.
And we're huge sponsors of David Faconti and his work at Plot Juggler. Like, I think we were one of the first.
Plot Juggler is wonderful.
We use it every day, so we send him little love notes all the time, and I couldn't be happier with that. I mean, that's a majority of our work is actually. And it's funny, like we put out graphs of like, okay, here's what the lower level microcontroller encoder reads are. here's what it looks like now. We replay. We're a big fan of replaying data. In terms of testing, we do have a good test suite that I'm very proud of for our robotic stack. We use the ROS unit and ROS testing. We throw sensor data at, we have a continuous build server using Circle CI. And so, when our, we commit code, it all goes on that Circle CI server. It runs the ROS unit test and makes sure that the basic mowing sort of workflow still works. And we throw massive amounts of sensor data. We have recorded us going through a field full of obstacles and make sure that it's like, yep. And that nothing you do interferes with the ability for the mower to stop, right?
Yeah, for sure. Very cool.
But you're right, testing, I would love to see ROS get better at this. I think the ROS community would flip out if they saw what us former web developers, the kind of tooling that we have, which is why I was super excited that you had the guys from Foxglove, which we're huge fans of and users of on the podcast, which I know they just raised a big round. And I'm super fans of them and the testing that they're going to do, because I think they're going to level up our industry a lot, with real time and sort of, we've got some unique stuff that we're doing and working with them where, an incident happens in the field, and that may be that a sensor, sort of encoder drops or some other things, and we can tag that and we can say, all right, what happened? Because that's real world data. And by the way, we're there in the field, so they're generating a ton of data, and so we can't go grab the entire bag file, which is what we used to do. We'd be like, somebody run out there with a hard drive and like sync the whole thing. Yeah. So we built a pretty cool system that you can tag it, and then there's a rsync type process that runs in the background. Nice is a Unix command that will lower the priority so that like the rest of the stuff can take...
so it's very low priority, so I see.
Right, and so then it'll squirt that data over that 30-second window of that thing to a server, and then we give it to Foxglove, and we're like, visualize that, because what happened there, right? Like, why did the mower it saw a corrugated fence and thought there was an obstacle straight in front of it when it was 30 meters out, right? So stuff like that, right? So it's been very fun. I digress, but we can definitely get better on the testing side, and if you're interested in that and find more resources, we'd love to know.
Yeah, for sure. We're getting a little better with ROS too.
Yeah.
For some of the testing resources, but I agree it's big, and especially for like industrial or like for company level reliability, like we could probably improve a lot as a community in this space, I think. Let's see. How do you update your systems?
Very excited and happy to talk about that. We part of my ROSCon talk was a little bit on that. Now, I love the current system that I believe you guys use for packaging because I'm a big fan of it. I think it's Catkin plus...
we use Colcon.
But
you're with ROS 1, so yeah.
Yeah, well, there's that, and then for the Bloom, that's the one I was going to talk about. Bloom is the sort of thing that will create packages, right? Now,
Debian packages for distribution on Linux. Correct.
So we evaluated using Bloom and tried it for a little while, but what we found is that we were unable to do a lot of the sort of we couldn't find a way to do meta packages, which we use a lot of, where it'll be like hey, this
packages kind of thing.
Well, and also too pulling in other stuff. So what we did was we went and we're targeting just Debian, so Ubuntu LTS, and so we don't need to create RPMs or other things, generically. And so what
for
we
other
do
Linux distributions or other operating systems. Okay.
So what we do is we create our own Debians, and we use Debian proper, right? So we just straight up generate them, the Debian from using the Debian Maintainer's Guide and all the tools that exist with changelog and all that stuff. And so then we build packages, and then we have a couple of private repos that are we mirror ROS upstream. So thank you. I mean, that's a known thing that a lot of people do, right? And then we mirror ROS security and ROS updates. And so we have our own package server. And so when our mower boots up, it runs apt update essentially. And if you look at my talk, it actually runs a couple things. It's actually dist upgrade. Which is an automated with Y, right? And so basically all our packages are installed. And then when we do that, the system is still running the current one. And so then when you go to reboot it, it'll actually run the new stuff. And so we use a ton of what's called post-inst. There's a lot of stuff, neat tricks you can do in some of the, like after you install something, you can redo your config and kind of fix files and change variables and stuff. And we found a little bit of that lacking in the sort of automated stuff. So again, when we control the full Debian, we can do a lot of that. And so we've been really excited by that. I would love to. I've heard that snaps are good, and I'd be really curious to explore that. I've even tried to connect with some of the people that are working on that. But I'm just I'm a low-level sort of Unix guy, and I've been doing Debian and Ubuntu for so long that when there was a tool out there like apt and Debian, I was like, just reach for it and say, okay, let's do this.
Yep.
But it's been fun. The other fun stuff is there's some neat stuff. We used to use a package called reprepro to manage them, and then there's another one came along called aptly that allows us to snapshot and mirror these. So now we have, what's really cool is when you deploy code to our mowers, the automated system will run all the tests. It'll actually generate a bunch of Debians. It goes and installs them automatically on our experimental mowers. So we have a couple
You
mowers.
run the tests on the platform? So on each mower you're running the tests, or you run it on your CI?
We run the test on the CI, which is like a Docker instance that mimics the whole install, right? And so, but you're right, it doesn't have a lot of the sensors on it. They're all faked, right? So you're right. So there needs to be, somebody needs to test it. And so what we do is we have a fleet, and I showed you ahead of time before we were on our lab where we have a couple mowers. Some of those mowers are on what we call the experimental branch. And experimental is just the Debian wording for hasn't yet been released to production. And we use that term lightly, but they're experimental. And so they run bleeding edge. And so what that means is that when they turn on, they're running main, which was formerly known as GitHub master, right? And so they run main. And so when you commit code, you can go downstairs and you can get on experimental. And we run around our lab, and you saw the field where we mow out back. And so we'll go and run that around and make sure that all the functionality is there. And as soon as we do enough of that, we then do a release. And a release is nothing more than the Git pull request that packages up everything from that's been an experimental for a while. We do those every 1 or 2 weeks. And what's nice about that is we do release notes, and then we text message our customers with those improvements and features. A lot of them are developer, but a lot of them, and then we word them both in English and Spanish and make sure that they know that, hey, the mower is going to be updated next time you turn it on. I think eventually we'll have to just copy the Tesla interface where you can download the update and then apply it. And then, there's 3 options. But for now, we are automating and forcing those upgrades because everybody is on the same one. And we can do that because we have a fleet that's able to manage. But I'm sure we'll get more sophisticated. But we're really happy with that. And I'd love to open source more in that area. It's just when I go to do it, I'm like, oh, this is Debian, this is apt, this is, it's just a process.
It's very specific to Linux.
It's specific to us, and also it's just a way to use all these open source that's pretty well documented. So
I feel like a really well written tutorial or blog post would be awesome around that kind of thing.
Challenge accepted.
Because
I'll definitely keep doing the Ross talks because we definitely enjoy that. We
awesome.
gave 2 I think this year, and we're big fans and sponsors. I hope to sponsor at a bigger level next time too.
Hell yeah. Yeah. So can you talk a bit more about safety in your design, or like making it robust?
Yeah, absolutely. We think about this all the time. From the current thing that we're doing, we've gotten a lot better, and we're continuing to get better. Safety is our first core value, safety first. And so one of the things we're doing right now that I'm very proud of is that we have a PhD risk, a person who just absolutely loves thinking about risk, data, and is asked the amount of data and things he asks for, he's like, how many accidents happened in this way that led to hospitalization through this? And he's like, okay, we put this in our system, and he's got things that he's automated to basically help us make sure that we adhere to the highest level to some of these standards that are out there. And so our current system is pretty well documented in how we adhere to these based on our understanding and interpretation. And as we get better understanding and as we get better sensor data and things, it can be updated. And we do
iteration.
Exactly. And a lot of the work we do is in validating those. So the key areas that I would think that your audience might be interested in are we are constantly trying to push the limits of the obstacle detection framework and pipeline. So our customers, what we tell them and what it actually does is a little different, right? So we err on the side of safety. So our system can detect obstacles of a certain size, and I won't sort of go into that right now. And what we tell them is it has to be of this size, and we do that for that margin of safety.
So you give them the worst case, and
Correct.
you internally have something a little better on average,
Right.
probably.
And then what they know is they say, okay, cool. Right. And so the biggest one is people are like, hey, does it detect sprinkler heads? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like those are too small. And I was like, sometimes us humans even have trouble, like,
Oh yeah, I'm
we'll
sure.
run right
Running
over
them
those.
over.
And what the neat part is, though, is that when I ask them really, like, what are you getting at? Like, what, and they say, well, if this thing's going to do the whole thing, it needs to know that. And I'm like, remember, you do the boundary. And I was like, why don't you just like do that part yourself? And you go around where those are because you installed them. He's like, oh yeah, I installed all those sprinkler heads. That's my job,
Yeah,
right? And he's
they
like, I'm
know
not
that.
going to hit them, right? And I was like, why don't you just go one lap inside, do a lap, and let the mower do that, and then you take out a string trimmer, edger, weeder, blower, and you do that detailed work.
You
And he's like,
work while you do it. Oh, that's awesome that they
bingo.
can parallelize their own effort.
Yeah, and so that's pipelining is huge. In fact, when I talk about Greenzie, we take job openings, not jobs, right? There's hundreds and there's thousands of job openings just at one of our customers, for workers that they don't have and can't find. And so when Greenzie comes along, it says, I'll take that really boring one and you can pipeline. And so that crew that used to be a 3 or 5 person crew can be like 1 or 2 people now with a couple of robotic workers, and now they're doing the same work that they were able to do, and they're able to go home, sooner and go talk to their kids and just,
Do all
anyway,
that life.
just,
Yeah,
exactly.
totally. It's less work for everyone to do, basically, because
Bingo.
the robot has taken over some of it.
Yep.
Or at least taking some of it that was already there and there aren't enough people for,
Bingo.
in a sense. Yeah. Okay. So with how do you test your robots? So you mentioned that you have this main branch and you'll go and you test it on your robot in your fields. How do you make sure that something is ready to be deployed to all of the mowers in your system?
I'm glad you asked this because this circles back to something I said let's talk about in the future, and that is that we eat our own dog food. And what I mean by that is that we are current subcontractors to a couple of our customers. Cool. So we our mowers. I'm wearing the outfit. I actually have a uniform. I wear this. I have 5 of these shirts, and I'm wearing the lawn mowing shoes, and we have the safety glasses in here, and we have trailers and trucks, and we mow. So today we went and we have a couple customers. They have sites, and we say, hey, can we go mow? And they're like, absolutely. I mean, every time they're like, yeah. The good news is, we carry the insurance and liability to do it, and the training. We're OSHA certified or OSHA trained. Excuse me, I don't think there's a certification, but and we follow all their guidelines, and we use
OSHA
our product.
Again?
OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They're the ones who would dictate that when you're doing this activity that you have, and I won't show you my shoes, but they're closed-toed. Right, so a composite or steel toe, that when you're in the field,
so it's a standards body for worker safety,
correct,
effectively, or worker conditions or something.
Yeah.
Okay,
and by joining and being there, they'll report on incidents and things in
that are
order
unsafe.
Exactly, and to order to understand. They're very big in construction, right? This is why when you go to a construction site, if you're not wearing your helmet, your hard hat, OSHA can get you in trouble. So, but I digress a little bit. So we, as subcontractors, we go mow. And that's pretty critical for us, both from a product standpoint to also know. But what we do is when we go out and we do the work to be done, that's the day after is usually when we do our releases. We'll go and we say, we tried to push it before where we're like, oh, that's just a small fix. Let's just put it into production. The good news is we can issue fixes pretty quick. Like we've got a system for doing that. We can hot fix and do a branch off stable and do a hot fix, and we've had to do those before. Luckily some of them aren't like critical. The test suite will cut that out, right? But it might be some small fix that gets out there. But in doing so, by actually doing the job to be done, we are effectively
getting firsthand experience.
Right, and we're making sure that what I would call is sort of the it's more eyes on the bugs make sort of bugs shallow. That's the Cathedral Bazaar approach, right? Is that as our customers see these things and as we see them, like we can fix them. And so I tell our team, and we've strived to do this, but we strive to make sure that we can release early and often. and quickly. And I think that is probably our kicker. So we even have DevOps. We have a full-time DevOps that just helps us with developer tooling, developer happiness, logging, and making sure that our stuff is just fast to go out. And I think that's just critical. We'll just probably continue to build that practice internally. But to answer your question, how do we know when it's ready to go is when we feel comfortable and we've used it ourselves and we've mowed lawns with it and it still works and it passes all our tests. We package it up, and we what's interesting is that we just do a release off stable, and we package it all up, bump the version numbers, and then hit go, and it automatically deploys into all across our fleet. And so then that's when we do our text message to the customers to say, hey, next time you turn it on,
these are the changes that'll be applied.
Yeah, and most of the time they're excited. They're like, oh, cool, I asked for that feature last week, and we're like, yep.
Here it is. That's awesome. Do you, I guess, how do you train people to use your system? Like, how is it that?
Yeah, right now we're venture backed, and so we're very hands on. In fact, I've hired some people who are robotic technicians who speak English and Spanish, better Spanish than I do, and they go on site and are doing a lot of that. And we're building up that practice as well. I'm a big fan of the quote. What is it? Good artists emulate. Great artists steal. Right?
Oh yeah.
And so what we did is I asked our customers, like, who has the best training? And they said, and I won't say who it is because we're going to copy them. And I said, great, we're going to do university. And and I said, like, let's just. I mean, honestly, we're not going to. It's not going to steal everything because it's just totally different.
No, but it's
I'm
also
saying, like, what did they do?
Bootstrapping the decisions.
Yeah.
It's like they did a lot of things through iteration. You're just kind of grabbing that and starting there.
Yeah. And honestly, I think hopefully that we'll leverage and level up the industry by not starting from ground zero, right?
That's
and so
true.
we have a very good training program that is very hands-on, and we've gotten very good at it. In fact, I'm very proud of the work that our team does. They've delivered it several times. In fact, when we first started, one of the things we did that was very unique was we did training before we even had anything, which was awesome. We invited landscapers to come train on what we had now, and they'd ask questions like, well, what do you do about it? And we're like,
adding it to the thing. Yeah.
Or we'd be like, we'd do it with them, and then they'd be like, I'm confused by X, and we'd be like, re-explain that, right? And so we've done a lot. And so now if you were to go out with our gentleman who does one of our gentlemen who does the training right now, he's very good at it and even does some really things that are unique. Some of our investors have been in the green industry for a while, and they talk about training being very specific, where you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them why, and then you
tell them what you've told them.
Yes. And so we do a lot of that, and then a lot of it is from example. And sort of building on, so there's like a base case. Like what we do is we used to kind of go into like safety and all sort of stuff, and we're like, you know what, just show the basic use case, and then start talking about some of the things that could happen and trigger those things to happen. And then the other thing we do that's really nice too is that we trigger some things. Like for instance, we're very intentional about when we start going, we say, something happened. He pauses the mower or whatever, and then he says, "What would you do?" And we have them call support. We have a 7A to 7P support line that's text message and phone, and that's staffed by our level 1 engineers, and some of us now, which is we all do support. We all have shifts. And so we'll answer it and we'll say, oh, cool. Looks like you've got this. Thanks for calling. You can call anytime. The answer is this. We know what it is. Hit resume and you should be able to do it. And they go, oh, that was easy. And so we helpfully then they because if we just showed up and we're like, oh, you can call support for anything. I mean, they're not going to do it. But if we have them do it in a case where it's really easy and it makes them feel good and we say thank you and do all these things, and we're ready for it, that they go, oh, well, that was fun, and then we also are watching, so we congratulate them. Like we'll send them a text and be like, hey, great first map.
It's kind of like they're in on the project.
Bingo.
In a sense.
Bingo. You nailed it. Yeah. And so it's, I'm very proud of our training. And that's some of my background was in a lot of that technical training, like making the complex simple. And so very proud of our work in that. And I think we have a lot to do and a lot of work to do there, but we're pretty good at it, I think.
Yeah. How long does it take to train someone before they can be up and running?
We used to advocate for a couple of days, and I'd be surprised. I think the last training we did, one of our guys shows up and he's like, they got it. Like after an hour, he's like, they're good.
Yeah.
He's like, and so now what we do is we hang out with them and help them because they need help, and just see if they need any, do site selection and stuff like that, which is critical.
I see.
So we've gotten really good with the pre-work and sort of pre-material, and then when we come on site, it's very quick. As you can imagine, these are experienced operators. And we've gotten some of the analogies very good, like you've done, and the system itself has gotten really simple. It's basically an appliance, right? So there's one
it's
light.
like cruise control, as you were saying.
Bingo. I mean,
you do your outline and you say go.
When I got a new car, they didn't train me on cruise control. I was just like, oh, there's the 2 buttons for it. Got it, right? So it's trying to make it like that, right? And it didn't used to be like that. It used to be, I mean, you used to watch us. We'd have a laptop and we'd be like, all right, Ross launch.
You have RViz open. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy. Okay. So how many of these do you have? Like how many mowers are, I'm curious about the business model. So you're venture backed at the moment. Yeah. But will it be a subscription based thing? Will people own these robots, or how will it, or will people own the autonomous system and the mower?
Yeah, I'm happy to share all this. We're pretty open book with almost everything except for probably my if my employees are on a PIP. That's probably the only thing I won't share, and their salaries.
What's that?
A performance improvement plan. That just means you're in trouble. I see. The joke is that we're a pretty open book about a lot of stuff in our business. We're not like a stealth mode startup, and we never have been. So it's just easier to just
be open all the time.
Yeah, it is. You don't have to remember what you told people. And so for our business model currently, we're trying to meet our customers with how they pay or how they charge. And so mowing is a seasonal business. And when you think about seasonal workers and robotic workers, there's a cost associated with those workers. If I wanted to have a worker, I might pay them a yearly, you think about costs in years, because a lot of these companies that do commercial have these contracts that last for a year. And they're like, okay, we're going to need, 3 people on this crew. And right, exactly. Well, 3 people on this crew, right? And so our costs are pretty simple in that we charge how our customers how they get paid, and so it's a 1 monthly fee for our software. Now the mower itself is, like I said, upfitted, and so what's great about that though is that the manufacturer is able to do that, and what's great about that is that they've been able to put their procurement and their economies of scale on these things. So I guarantee you that they're getting better pricing on a Hall effect encoder from from Honeywell than we were able to get, right? Because when we call, we're like, can we get 100? And they're like, when they call, they're like, can we get 50,000? And by the way, here's our procurement person, and we probably already order from you anyway. And they're like, great, yeah, we can add that to your next order. And so there is some new stuff, but they've obviously gotten better pricing on that. And again, mower manufacturers and OEM producers are better at the storing and producing of that equipment at the facility where they do it, and so we don't have a big manufacturing facility where we're doing.
Yeah, you don't need it. You just do the software.
We just do the software
and the testing and sensor suite setup, and like figuring it out. Exactly,
and constantly iterating on the next generation and our sort of what we call upgrades in field, right? And so in terms of charging the business model, I would not be surprised if we moved to a robotics as a service, and I know that's a pretty popular, what do you call it, RaaS, right? And some of our customers are asking for it. So we would love to work with some of our partners on doing that. Could you imagine a day where if you're a landscaper and you say, hey, I mow from May to October or April to October, however many months that is, 7, 8 months. And we said, what if we could give you a mower and a robotic worker that lives on that mower for one fee, $2,500, I'm making up a number, a month. And they go, that's a dang good deal, because, like if you think about the person and the mower, and they start to do the math and they're like, whoa, that's like, 6 or 7 an hour in terms of labor. And we're like, great, like not to be coy or anything, but like that's, you can't hire a person for that. I mean, no person would want to work for 7 an hour, right? But definitely a robotic worker,
and also it can work through the heat and all the and also won't get tired. Quality,
and also we do get pushback because they're like, well, what about in January, like right now, when some of our customers only mow in a little bit or not at all if they're in the Northeast. And I go, well, what do you do now? And they're like, fire them or get seasonal workers or have them do something else. And I'm like, well, guess what? Your robotic worker on your mower on March 1st is ready to mow. And, even if you put him in the shelf, and put him aside and weatherized him.
Still be ready to mow.
And guess what? He's gotten like 50 updates since then.
Yeah.
And is better and like has more features and functionality from all those people we were mowing in Florida.
He's been training in the off time.
Exactly.
Your robotic worker. Yeah.
And, so, and what's cool is that they don't get it yet until they see it and experience it. And then they're like, whoa, they're like, this is software. Like I've got software on my mower. And a robotic worker that's continually getting better. And it's hard to see, like, it's hard to tell somebody, but when they see it and they experience it, they get really like addicted to it, right? So our early customers are going to win big because they've been early adopters and they've seen us through some of the challenges and things, but they've also experienced some pretty big wins. And so I think that business model will continue, but I'm also open to changing it. Like we're very, very customer oriented, customer focused and obsessed. And so if they need something else, we'll do it for them. And I think that we are using a lot of capital right now to do speed and to shore up. And so when our customer asks for something, we just do it. And when we hit those economies of scale, I think we'll have those general SaaS margins that are pretty high when we're just delivering a service and we don't have to go out and do training and, all that other stuff, which is we're on the path towards doing.
Yeah. So you said that you've always been bootstrapping in the past, and this is the first time you're taking venture capital. Would you tell me a bit about your experience with this and just talk on it for a bit?
I love both. I think that there's room and time to do both. I think if you don't have to raise money, you shouldn't. It is, I think there's very good use cases when you're doing something. It's funny. My co-founder, David, is really funny. He's an interesting guy, and he has a quote that I'll repeat. He says, starting a business is hard. There's all kinds of challenges, people, business, the market, there's timing, there's all kinds of stuff. He's like, so if the whole thing's hard anyway, why not just start a big one? Right. and I was like, you're right. Like, why not? He's like, why not just go after something massive? Like that's, huge and impactful and game changing. And it's funny because that's kind of his investment thesis, right? Like he won't invest in like, gambling or whatever, like it's just not, if it's like a bootstrap, it has to be big. And so it's, there's a time and place for that. Now, bootstrapping, I absolutely love because there's something brilliant and amazing about selling something, delivering it, getting paid, and using that money to grow. And I've done that.
Yes.
And service businesses are great for that. Restaurants would be good for that, where you're just building one and then you use the profits from one to go to the other. And some robotics companies could probably, do that.
Do some model.
But if you are going after something big and there's a leap of faith or there's a lot of things that have to happen and a lot of bets that you are capable of doing and know, like if you know something that the rest of the world doesn't, and I do and happen to know, and that is that I think software is going to eat the outdoor power equipment industry and that will be the most powerful thing on these devices, then I personally would pay a lot of money now to be the operating system of the future. And so I'll trade today's dollars hands down
for tomorrow's.
Yes. And so that's what we do. And so
you're placing a bet very heavily.
Oh yeah. And what's interesting is the mindset shift from going from bootstrap to venture has been tough for me because in the bootstrap, a lot of questions I would ask would be like, how do we pay for that? And, like right now, like next month or in 90 days, net 90 when bills are due.
You want to stay positive the whole time, basically.
Right. And now what I'm doing is I am constantly trying to build a valuable company and an asset. And I use that using capital. And so I do a lot of things that are hard, that scale, and doing a lot of things that are very unscalable now to prove that it's scalable later. And what I mean by that is like, we eventually would like for the outdoor equipment dealers to do a lot of the fixes for us. And so what I do is I go above and beyond to make sure that it is easy and that they're incentivized to do it. And so I pay, more than their sort of normal rate so that they don't feel like, oh, who's this company and why are they asking me to like put a new camera on here? And I'm like, hey, like I want you to, I'm going to use my venture dollars to figure this out and get better at it. So
and
that,
get lots of feedback from them so you can improve the process. And eventually it will be less painful
bingo,
for future ones.
bingo.
Interesting. Now let's see. We're
But I'm
about
sure yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to say, in bootstrapping and venture, I'm sure there's a lot more people who could talk more about it. And I know we're running out of time, and I'm happy to go into way more detail. But I also don't know too much. I'm still fumbling along as I go. I wouldn't say that I've mastered it. We have raised quite a bit of funds, and every time I tell my friends, I'm like, "Oh, I'm just not good at this." They're like,
look
yeah.
at the results.
They're
Yeah.
like, "You seem to be doing okay," but I guess I'm harder on myself than I am on anybody else, right? So,
Gotcha. Let's see. So we're a little over the scheduled time. Are you okay to talk a little longer?
sure, yeah.
Okay. I would love to hear more about your bootstrapping experience, and then kind of like if there's anything that you have learned there that you can bring to this venture capital experience.
Yeah, so fundamentally, the impact, the differences of like building a business that is both bootstrap, meaning we sold a product, deliver that product, get paid, and then repeat, versus the venture, which is, in my mind, could be something like that, but it's probably trading a lot of, it's basically going into like what I would call a negative sort of, if you look at, I guess the best way to describe it is, there's a cost of acquisition for each customer that can get rather large. And so at some point, you basically see this thing where it looks like your company is just burning money. And every new customer you acquire causes you to take this, we call it the J curve. And David Scott talks a lot about this if you talk about recurring revenue businesses. That J curve goes way down. And every time you do it, it really just looks like you're just burning cash. But what the neat part is that at some point, the J can do this, and every recurring business, a lot of people are like, well, so-and-so doesn't make any money. And you're like, well, that's not really the point right now, right? Correct. Because they're creating these economies of scale, and every customer they acquire, it might cost $12,000 to acquire that customer, but every year they make $12,000. And the margin on that $12,000, the profit on that $12,000 is very high, the marginal dollars you do once you acquire them. And then they also don't think about net expansion, which is where each customer might add more, right? So you've cost to acquire them,
The network
and then they
effect
say,
kind of thing.
Right.
So it gets exponentially better to use the service or something.
Right. And so what I would say is the lessons that I learned bootstrapping were just the basic ones. Like I still rely on a lot of them. Like how do I build a good culture? How do I hire, retain? How do I fire people? I don't like talking about that, but it's like something that you have to do. You have to put the right people on the bus, and all those lessons I learned using our own money, like I have to do now, even though I have venture money, I still do that, right? Like, and I think that's where I think you've talked about it a lot. The analogy I think you gave in the agriculture one is that like too much money can mess you up, right? If you don't have any constraints, like that can be terrible. So one of the things that we've done differently in venture, and maybe this will turn out to be a dumb move, but I have raised sequentially, sort of small incremental rounds, as opposed to giant ones. And so we don't like advertise like, oh, we raised 16 million. Like we've never raised a $6 million round. And we've done that because even though we take a little bit of dilution on that, like what I've said is that in bootstrapping, I have built a grape, and I've eaten the grape, right? And so a grape is pretty good. But if you're hungry, it's cool to build a watermelon and eat a slice. And so when you think about that, like that's what we're doing with Greenzie and Venture Backed is that would you rather have a full grape or would you rather have a slice of a watermelon? And by the way, the other slices all go to investors and people who are actively taking risk with you. And, and we've done a really good job, I think, of recruiting in on our cap table, we call it, all our investors.
Your capitalization table,
They're all people who are green industry, robotics, distributors, dealers, outdoor power equipment.
Very smart money, basically.
People
very useful connections.
I call them and I'm like, hey, how many mowers were sold in there? And they're like, well, you're not supposed to know the stat, but here you go. And I'm just kidding. They don't say that. They say, actually, here's what I can tell you, and here's what I know, and here's this, and here's who you need to talk to, and here's 7 other connections, and call me later, and I'll have that for you. And I've been thinking about this, and they are proactive, and so we have a very good. That's the other thing that I think is unique is that we're bringing along a lot of people with us, which is really fun to me. There's a bit of And what's cool too is I'm lucky in that I was able to participate in some of our rounds, which is rare, I think, for an entrepreneur. I have had some success before, and I always bet on myself. So I led one of the rounds, which is kind of fun, to say, okay.
What does it mean? What does it mean you led a round? Does it mean you're the person that goes around talking and trying to raise investment? Is that what you
I'm
mean?
always trying to go around and raise investment. That's actually my job as CEO. So I'm always trying to do it.
Sure.
But for this round, I went to my investors and said, hey, things are looking really well for the company. I believe that we have hit our next milestone, because we did. And I said, I'm leading this next round, meaning I'm putting in $1 million of my own money on this next round. And I think we need this. And does anybody want to come in with me? And the fun part about that is you can imagine
awesome.
what happens is that I didn't get to put in $1 million. I only put in half that, but and there's all SEC deregulation. You can go look it up. So I'm not, not like I'm bragging about it or anything, but but I did get to be the largest investor in that. And then the reason it went down is because all my other investors were like, I'm in, put me down for more, like we're in with you, let's go. And they aren't always like that. A lot of them are like, hey, like these metrics are bad. Like you need more, this, you need more that.
Yeah, they're prioritizing something different.
But it is good that I do have an investor cap table that does believe in us, and we've had many that will up, and we've been able to recruit others as well. But that is a fun game that I am not good at yet, but I have gotten better at it through failure. The last round was very good, and we raised $4 million. Very excited by that. Thank you. We didn't really. I'm not very good at publicizing those things because I'm just not good at it. And I honestly think it's kind of like taking on debt.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Because it's kind of like we take on this capital and now we have to utilize it and spend it very wisely. So I don't know. I do think that there's something to be said for celebrating and always helping your customers. And so if there's a way to phrase it that helps your customers, but I'm just not big on the current zeitgeist right now where like raising is the thing. Like it's funny because the thing that I would like to celebrate and we celebrate more internally is like happy customers, sales and that kind of stuff. And so that's not really like celebrated. We don't, like a lot of companies don't say like, we just sold $1 million. Like that should be celebrated probably more than the current raises, because raises just mean that,
Raises, do you mean higher valuation and raising heavy rounds?
Yeah. And also they without context, they don't really mean anything, right? Like,
it's just a number.
A lot of people don't share, the dilution terms.
And they might have been on unfavorable terms,
correct.
too. Like there's a lot of context necessary, I believe.
And good news is, I won't disclose some of this because it's not mine to disclose, but we have very good terms on our raise. Very simple. There's not a lot of funny business with prefs and convertibles.
No, like crazy veto power or anything to any investor. Some
no,
things
that
seem
my
kill
co-founder
companies.
is the most entrepreneur friendly. I think it's going to come out that he is, and he's had the Midas touch. I think just recently he's got a couple companies that are worth billions, and so he's super entrepreneur friendly, and so it's crazy how entrepreneur friendly he is. In fact, he's so friendly on terms that he's just like, what do you want to do? That it actually it makes people like me who have high responsibility go, well, shoot, he just gave me all the responsibility. I better make this a win.
A good fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's neat. That I've learned that about really good venture is that they, it's funny. People talk.
They want to help you succeed.
Yeah.
Rather than just they want to take the maximum cut.
Yeah.
And kind of screw you.
And he's been an entrepreneur too, so with that also is a nicety. Having been in those shoes. Personally, I can't do it. You'll never find me being an investor. I'm terrible at it. I've done a little bit, but I'm just not good at it. I like being in the
driver's seat.
In the arena.
You're betting on yourself. Yeah.
I
see. What do you think is the future? Like when you look out next year, 2 years, 5 years, where do you see Greenzie going?
Well, we just did a couple of our vision planning. I'm very big on goals and goal setting. I just looked at my personal goals from 5 years ago back that I wrote in 2016, and I think it's incredible that, Bill Gates said it. I think the quote is attributed to him. He said, people underestimate what they can do in 10 years. They overestimate what they can do in 1. And so I'm a big fan of writing your goals and the vision, and there's a way to do it. And so if we look 5 years out, Greenzie, and again, the name is actually interesting, and it may be that Greenzie is the product just for green, and who knows? I mean, not good at branding.
Eventually, it's the same kind of like you can follow this model in a lot of areas, I imagine.
Totally.
But right now you're making mowing.
But if you go back to what I told you, that our big mission is to free humans from repetitive outdoor labor. And that has always been the case, and we will continue to do that. I just learned the other day that there's even self-driving trucks get dirty, and 18-wheelers, and they pay some people to go to these things where they park them, and then they just do this, the up and down motion to spray them with, like, to clean the wheels and stuff. That's highly repetitive outdoor. And I think it needs to be automated, because I think humans are not made to get carpal tunnel doing this with their elbow.
Yeah.
But what they are made to do is say, hey, this needs to be clean, and hey, that one doesn't need to, and hey, I'm better at
all the
singing
decision
and eating
making
and all this other fun
at
stuff.
a high level.
So I believe that Greenzie in 5 years will be helping free humans from repetitive outdoor labor, and we'll do that for as long as it takes. And I think that's a big, noble task that's going to take a long time. And so a lot of people always ask, are you for sale? And the answer is no, we're not for sale, but how much?
You started in 2018 with Greenzie, is it correct?
Yeah.
That's awesome. You're already getting questions about that.
Well, I mean, everybody does, right? I mean, at least when you sort of talk to them, big people or big players or partners and things like that. But, the answer is no, but how much? I mean, everything's for sale except for my dog, right? So, but the big thing that they have to answer is will they help us in our mission to free humans from repetitive outdoor labor? And the answer is no, then it's not even on the table.
It's not, Gotcha.
So if we were to sell, to merge, to buy, to acquire other companies, they have to be in support of that mission, and that big mission to free humans from repetitive outdoor labor. And if they are, let's go. Let's do it. I see us continuing to do that, and I don't know where it'll take us. I think we're small, and so we do a lot of short-term planning. We do quarterly OKRs and objective key results, and we we have a yearly goal, and we have some big yearly goals, company objectives that we go for. We have a 3-year plan to be very specifically on more mower manufacturers, possibly in other turf areas, other sort of platforms. And so I see us doing that. I have a couple other things that probably are more internal and not really exciting to share, but I see that. And I see us also being big members of the community. I would love to see us open source more, and I just think that some of the work we're doing is just needs to be out there, and I'd be happy to continue to contribute. I'm a huge fan of open source. I've been doing it my entire life, so it's awesome. It's game changing.
For sure. Last thing before asking for links and things, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting their career?
I'm not good at this. I've had co-founders. My last co-founder was very good at giving advice, and I think he even has a famous blog article on it. On the career, I think it's funny. A lot of people will tell you, I can only speak from experience. So let's just say that I'm not good at giving advice. That's what I try and do. I'm not very good at it either. But I would say that finding something you love is dumb. When I think at certain levels, you should strive to work hard and learn, and not make not do this thing where they're like, if you do the work you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I was like, man, if you do something you love, you're going to hate it. That's the biggest way to destroy a hobby.
So
you're
funny.
like, I love tennis. You're like, I'm going to become a tennis instructor. And now you're going to be like, I hate tennis, pardon my French. But, so I think career advice for somebody starting out is get out there, just do something do something big, and do the worst task that someone doesn't want to do. What that means is okay, so if you want to go into finance, great. Go figure out how to, make more Bitcoin money off somebody else who doesn't own Bitcoin. That's fine. That's not for me. I don't think that's very exciting. I would say find a company that's doing something noble or good or sustainable, and then go do the worst thing in it. Go do customer support, right? Or work the worst job. And if you're useful and good, you will learn and you will move quickly. There's plenty of examples of people who've worked in the mailroom up to CEO, and it happens all the time. I have good friends who, worked in businesses who are CEOs now, and people are like, oh, how'd you do that? And it's like, well, overnight. It's like, no, of course not overnight. It's like, they did something hard and learned and jumped in and did it, and weren't afraid to say, this is hard, and what I'm doing is hard, and it may take a little while. And that's easy for me to say because I'm sort of older and having done that. But yeah, I mean, I worked as a consultant for a long time, traveling, Monday through Thursday, working in
Wow.
really weird locations, but it was the amount of learning I could think back on that it was able to help me do to build good products for good customers and do things. It's amazing. So I don't have any good advice for career. You could skip this section. It's
I
go
think
do
that was very
something,
valuable.
go do something noble and hard and boring and learn whatever you can from it. That's my advice.
Love that. Hell yeah. Last thing is, do you have any links or contact info or anything that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Absolutely. So Twitter is our more developer robotics focused pithy jokes and shout outs to Ross. So that's where we sort of do that. YouTube is pretty good. We have a series called How It Works that's actually pretty good, even for roboticists and sort of non-roboticists, which I know is your audience sort of emerging. We share a lot about how the product works, which landscapers really love. And so that's booting back up in series. We used to do one a month. We've sort of tailed off in December. We didn't do one. We're back on that schedule and committed to it, goal setting. And so we'll be doing a bunch of those YouTube videos. I'd say that our YouTube channel is fun. We went viral on TikTok, although that's probably not going to go look at that. We have like a couple of videos with like millions of views, which is nuts.
Wow, that is nuts.
Yeah, I don't understand
awesome.
that one. And
TikTok's
Instagram
crazy.
is really good for if you're a landscaper and you want to see how the product works. We're constantly posting stuff from the field and like actual mowing and
Cool.
actual usage of the robot, which I think is really fun and good. But yeah, all those channels are good, and our website, it does not update it that often, but you can definitely go there if you're interested in careers. We, definitely go there. And I think LinkedIn, I haven't figured out yet. I need to get better at that. One of my investors is very good at that, and I need to ask him how to do it. So, but yeah, go to Greenzie, Greenzie.com. We're Get Greenzie or Greenzie on most channels. You can find us, and I think that's it. Yeah, I mean, I think we have some open source too on GitHub. One of our path planners is out there. It's good for research, for coverage. We took one of the papers and kind of improved it, so you're happy to do that. We have some fun stuff that we're going to open source soon on the newer one that we did. So we don't maintain that one, unfortunately. If somebody would like to pick up maintaining on that, they're welcome to, but we have some really other fun stuff. So,
all right. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to this conversation with CBQ. Thank you again to our founding sponsor, Open Robotics, and I hope to see you next time.